Hello. So in my last two videos I talked about um, the writings of Baudelaire and then the writing a short story by Gerald de Nerval, and I thought it would just bring it all full circle and uh, read something by Gautier, Theophile Gautier, for my own pleasure and also to share this with anyone that finds it interesting. Um, the three were contemporaries. Gautier and de Nerval were lifelong friends. In fact, they were childhood friends. And Baudelaire had a profound respect for both of them, but um, probably more so Gautier. He dedicated his Flowers of Evil to Gautier, and I'm going to read the dedication. So this is the beginning of The Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire. To the impeccable poet, to my perfect magician of French letters, to my very dear and venerated master and friend, Theophile Gautier, with sentiments of the deepest humility, I dedicate these morbid flowers. First time I read this was also the first time I ever heard of Gautier. So after reading Paris Spleen and Sylvie, and wanting to read something by Gautier, I kind of knew I was only going to be reading one thing, again for myself, and I read the poet. And one might call it a short story, but it really is an elegy to Gerard de Nerval, Gautier's friend. And so the poet is basically an obituary. This is written after the death of de Nerval. I said in my last video that de Nerval went mad and hanged himself. And this is a beautiful elegy. It has the same heights of language that you can find in the poetry of Baudelaire and in the short stories of de Nerval. But what makes Gautier so masterful is his controlled pitch. He can use big language, but he's always directing the emotions. So I'm going to read just a few passages. I've read excerpts from Baudelaire and de Nerval, so if anyone watches all three, hopefully you can get a sense of the similarities and maybe some nuances or differences between the three, just in the little bits that I'm reading. Like I said, they were childhood friends, and Gautier had the unfortunate experience of having to identify de Nerval's body after he killed himself. Though stunned with shock and half blinded with tears, it was my duty to go and identify him on the clammy slab of marble in the back room of the mortuary. I was even as ashen as his corpse, and the very memory of that last mortal meeting of ours still sends an involuntary shiver through my frame. So it's still flowery language, but it's sad. I had wet eyes reading most of this. It's a man talking about someone that he cared about very deeply, and it's happens to be written by one of the greatest French writers, in my opinion. So it really just has it all. It is beautiful. Not for fancy pyrotechnical language, but and the earnestness uh, behind the words that he's using. It's extremely tender and loving. This is a man that lost a very dear friend of his and was very sad about it. Another passage. He's describing de Nerval's countenance. His forehead was admirably formed, polished like a piece of ivory and glowing like porcelain, while the hair was strikingly blonde, starting very high and far back on the brow, and so extremely fine that it seemed like a haze of golden smoke. No nobler, more capacious, and more smoothly rounded head was ever prepared by nature for human thought. Yet such a countless number of ideas were humming inside it, so many different systems of belief and knowledge were temporarily lodged there, such a wild assortment of theories, philosophic, theogonic, and aesthetic, had found a resting place, that this pantheon of the mind eventually became a pandemonium. So, in this incredibly rich, textured language, he's doing two things. He's showing respect, being incredibly detailed and exuberant in the way that he's portraying his friend. But also, I had mentioned before, de Nerval was clinically insane. And he, in this beautiful passage, he's just describing the madness of his friend and the sadness of his friend. Such a brilliant mind that went astray. And through the story, he talks about how Gautier himself and the people around Gerard de Nerval didn't notice him slipping from reality. He was as bright and as lucid and as clear-headed as he had ever been, and his writings never suffered for it. But in hindsight, they found examples that he was in fact losing it, and it's a regrettable experience that I imagine it must be to go through. And I'll read one more passage. The lamp is near extinction and gives out nothing but intermittent glimmerings of light. It half illuminates a host of grinning phantoms and monstrous chimeras, muttering in sleepy tones of things forgotten, incomprehensible, or full of uncertain terrors. Instinctively one knows that a denouement approaches, and that this denouement will be fatal. And so it befell. The unhappy Gerard de Nerval brought an end to all his sufferings with a thin strap. Incredibly moving. These are all of these writers are very important to me, and entwined, and in a lot of ways I care about them a lot more than I consciously think about. And it was sort of a somber, sullen afternoon to read this. I believe the first time that I had read it, I had not at that time read Gerard de Nerval, so I don't believe it had the same emotional impact on me. But I still have very fond remembrances. I only have this little book. It's a short story collection of Theophile Gautier, and then there's a single novel that I've read. It's Mademoiselle de Maupin, and that's the extent for a writer that I admire so much. I wish, kind of with all of them, Baudelaire as well. I wish there was more available to me, especially as an English speaker, as translated works and all. But that's it. So this is sort of the end of my Decadent December series. Leave a comment if you would like, and thank you for watching.